So it's 2024, you're getting into your health, you've started watching Andrew Huberman videos, you might have tuned into some podcasts with Matt Walker, for example, and you're beginning to understand the absolute importance of sleep and how so many people have very, very poor sleep quality. And then you inevitably go down the rabbit hole of optimizing your sleep and figuring out what the hell you can do to improve your sleep quality. And if you've done this, you know this is a very slippery slope. There's kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum with this. You have people that do absolutely nothing and apparently sleep very well. And then you have people on the other side of things, like Brian Johnson, who do every single thing feasible and more to optimize their sleep. If you haven't seen Brian Johnson's sleep routine, I would definitely advise just watching that video just to give yourself an idea of how far this can go. Brian Johnson's an interesting case, of course. I mean, this guy has had a 100 sleep score for something like 6 months. It might even be a year now at this point. So clearly what he's doing works, okay? But for 99.9% of people, what he does for his sleep isn't viable. It doesn't work like that for everyone. Where is the middle ground exactly, and how do we strike that middle ground? Inevitably, the more you get into sleep, the more you want to track your sleep. So you might have made a purchase like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Pixel Watch. Maybe you've gone even further and got yourself an Oura Ring, which is specifically designed for tracking your sleep. And you're obsessing every night about hitting that 100 sleep score, 100 readiness score, adequate REM sleep, adequate deep sleep. Where's your sleep latency at? Is everything on point? Are my ultradian cycles fluctuating as they should be? You know, it can go very, very out of hand very, very quickly. Maybe you've gone and bought a ton of sleep supplements and you're obsessing over them and you have a rigorous sleep supplement schedule. You're viewing sunlight in the morning, you're viewing the sunset in the evening, you're avoiding screens in the evening, you've changed your caffeine timing. You've done all of these things, but your sleep isn't really improving. In fact, more likely, it might even be getting worse. The more you have become aware of the importance of your sleep, the worse it has become. The more you want to wake up with a 100 sleep score and a 100 readiness score, the harder it has become to fall asleep and have a good night's sleep. Why? Because the harder you try to fall asleep, the harder it becomes. This, my friends, is what I call the sleep paradox. A paradox in which the more you try to improve your sleep, the worse it gets. At the very least, it definitely doesn't improve. So let's run through the sleep paradox. Let's figure out where you need to strike that middle ground and actionable tips that you can put into your lifestyle that are A, going to be good for your sleep, but B, are going to prevent you from getting too overly obsessed and fall into this horrible trap and this paradox of trying to fall asleep and improve your sleep so hard that it only gets worse. So without further ado, let's get into it. One of the first things you might have heard in terms of sleep optimization is syncing up your circadian rhythm. So viewing the sunlight in the morning and then viewing the sunset in the evening. And this has been shown to potentially improve melatonin production in the evening, thus helping you fall asleep and improving your sleep quality. That's like stage one that lots of people, like entry-level Huberman watchers, start to think about. And it's good advice. No one's saying it isn't. Then you have recommendations surrounding things like caffeine, which generally speaking, I think are good recommendations, such as cutting caffeine out at 3 p.m. I would personally recommend cutting caffeine out at midday. The reason being that because of caffeine's half-life and inevitable quarter life that people don't talk about, it seems that the biological half-life of caffeine lasts about 5 to 6 hours in the average person. This means that if you had 100 milligrams of caffeine, in about 5 hours time, you'd be down to 50 milligrams circulating in your blood. So if you had a normal sized coffee at 3 p.m., let's say 120 milligrams, give or take, at 10 o'clock, there'll be 50 milligrams still in your body. And by midnight, there will still be 40 milligrams going around in your body. And we know that caffeine inhibits things like deep sleep. So based on this, I would recommend to actually stop your caffeine at midday, if possible. This should mean that by bedtime, around 10, 11 p.m., let's say, you should have very, very minimal amounts of caffeine in your body, so your sleep won't be impaired too heavily. Me personally, I don't think this caffeine rule is that obsessive. I don't think it's too far down the rabbit hole. I think you can enjoy coffee and caffeine in that morning window, and cutting it off at midday is only going to have a net positive outcome for yourself. That being said, there are individuals, and many individuals I should say, that live in Italy, for example, who enjoy an espresso after dinner and somehow manage to sleep like a brick. Who knows how that works? It's case studies like these that just show you that There is never, ever, ever a set methodology for everyone. But who knows? Maybe if you did do research on them, you would still see that their deep sleep quality is drastically impaired via the late intake of caffeine. Who knows? So that's caffeine done and dusted. You then have alcohol, and I think the recommendations for alcohol are genuinely fantastic. Don't drink alcohol before bed if you want to have a good night's sleep. There is a pretty abundant amount of research to support that. We know with great accuracy that by drinking in the evening, even one glass of red wine in the evening has been shown to decrease sleep quality quite significantly. And of course, the more alcohol you drink in the evening, the worse it gets. Alcohol has been shown to chop your REM sleep in half and drastically drop your HRV as well, both of which are great indicators of your recovery, especially your night's sleep that night. So alcohol really is a big no-no if you care about your sleep. But that being said, don't get too obsessed with it. This doesn't necessarily mean you should get so obsessed that you should turn down seeing mates and never see your mates ever again and go out for a beer for fear of having a bad night's sleep. And this is going to be a running theme of this video. At what point do we say, who cares? There are things I want to do or need to do that are going to impair my sleep. And then you have your sleep environment. Ideally, you want to be in a pitch black room, so eliminate as much light as possible. So blackout blinds if you can, that would be awesome. If you can't, don't stress. And then you want to eliminate all noise too. If you live in a noisy area or a noisy house, or you're next to a road or a railway line or whatever, invest in some good earplugs. It will make a huge difference. The next one is supplements, okay? Now, supplements is something that people obsess about the most because humans being humans, we are constantly driving for the one fix, the one supplement that is going to fix our sleep. The main one now being magnesium, a magnesium L-threonate or magnesium bisglycinate supplement. Let me just walk you through magnesium briefly. Magnesium L-threonate can cross the blood-brain barrier. Magnesium bisglycinate isn't as effective at crossing the blood-brain barrier, it seems, but both are very good for relaxing and improving sleep quality. Maybe. The interesting thing here is there isn't actually much evidence on this. There is one, I think it's a patented formula of magnesium L-threonate called Magtin, Magtein, I believe, that has been shown to have some positive benefits on sleep. But the actual research is so minimal. There's all these unbelievable claims about magnesium in that it improves REM sleep, deep sleep, reduces sleep latency, which is the time of which it takes you to fall asleep. And there is barely any data to back this up. But anecdotally, and I would say this for myself, clients, friends, followers, pretty much everybody that I know that I've spoken to that has used magnesium for their sleep has only had positive things to say about it. So let's wait and see for more research before we can say anything for sure. But it does seem right now that magnesium is probably quite a good idea to take in the evening for sleep. I've got tons of videos on magnesium on my Instagram if you want to see some more. I won't dive into the details too much in this video. And then you have things like apigenin or chamomile tea, which seem to work, although again, there's barely any research there. Things like L-theanine, which might work pretty well for relaxation. Again, barely any research there as well. And there comes the question, which we have to ask, do you need to take supplements for your sleep? I would argue that you definitely do not. There's no right or wrong. It seems to be this kind of grey area. There might be other reasons to take magnesium in that it seems that lots of people are deficient. Something like 50 to 60% of the population might well be deficient. So yeah, maybe magnesium is a good idea. But do you need it for your sleep? Who knows? Does that mean you shouldn't try it? No, it doesn't. I would definitely recommend trying it. I know loads of people that have loads of success with it. I take it all the time. I think it's fantastic. So magnesium seems to be good. Apigenin seems to be all right. L-theanine, potentially. Do you need any of them? Absolutely not. Will they be your one-size-fits-all fix? Absolutely not. You need to address the fundamentals first. The overlooked fundamentals, which are you actually tired? Right? No one likes to ask this question. Have you exercised that day? Have you used your brain adequately? Are you mentally tired, right? These are pretty bloody obvious questions, but questions that people don't want to address because likely it's going to involve them doing a little bit of work to address them rather than just taking one magical little pill or supplement to fix their sleep problems, right? We know that you need to be tired to want to fall asleep. Pretty bloody obvious. Sleep is for recovery. So, first and foremost, I would advise getting exercise in on a daily basis. Half an hour to an hour at minimum. Do something like that every day. I would be baffled if your need for sleep and your sleep quality didn't improve as a result. Use your brain. Get mentally tired. Challenge yourself. Challenge your brain. You will find yourself in a more fatigued state in the evening. I would be baffled if you didn't. One note on exercise while we're here. I wouldn't recommend exercising within about 2 hours of going to bed. The reason being, you might actually impair your ability to fall asleep quickly because your heart rate and body temp might be up. So potentially push your exercise earlier in the day, afternoon, midday, morning, for example. And the same goes for when you eat your food. Another crazy overlooked thing is that people are snacking or eating their meals crazy late. People are like snacking up until going to bed. What happens when you eat food, especially food with carbohydrates in? Your blood sugar goes up, your heart rate goes up, your body temp goes up. You get some energy from that food. As such, you are going to struggle to fall asleep. Not everyone, of course, but for lots of people, yes. So to recap, the basics. Are you tired? Have you exercised? Are you mentally tired? When was your last meal of the day? Was it within 3 hours of going to bed? Ideally, keep it outside of 3 hours, at least outside of 2 hours. The same goes for exercise. You have those fundamentals. Then you can facilitate things further with viewing sunlight in the morning. If you really want to, view the sunset in the evening. Keep your caffeine in check. Keep your alcohol in check. And then maybe, just maybe, you could think about some supplements for your sleep if you really, really think you need them. But only once you've done those things I've mentioned first. That is so, so important. So I've just outlined what I consider to be pretty good advice for optimizing your sleep. But is this too obsessive? The answer, maybe. It is so easy to get too obsessed with your sleep. I've been there myself. When I started tracking my sleep quality, I got so obsessed with it to the point where I would be like trying so hard to fall asleep, but I just couldn't because I was just so in my own head about it. And this happens to so many people. The harder you try to sleep, the harder it can become. So how do you improve your sleep quality and action all these tips, but not be so hyper aware of your sleep that you actually shoot yourself in the foot and can't fall asleep? How on earth do we find this middle ground and avoid the sleep paradox? Here's what I've done for myself and for clients that have struggled with this same problem. First and foremost, you need to build resilience and you need to not be so fragile within your sleep routine, which is so easily done. When you have all these boxes that you need to tick for your sleep, i.e. your supplements, your sunlight, your sunset viewing, your activity level, it's got to be pitch black, there's got to be no noise, you can't have seen screen in the evening, your caffeine timing, your alcohol. When you're stressing about all of those things, if one of those things falls out of line, in your head, you're going to go, oh shit, my sleep is going to suffer as a result. And this happens all the time with people that are obsessing about their sleep. It becomes this very fragile process where unless everything is done perfectly in your routine, you fall apart. The same can be said for like rigorous morning routines and just daily routines and obsessive behavior in that realm. And sleep is no different. I would say it's probably worse than these things. So you cannot become overly reliant on this routine and you can't become overly reliant on this sleep optimization practice, because what you're doing is you're losing the control. You're doing everything you can to fight for control and fight for this perfect sleep. But what you're doing really is you're handing yourself over to the process. And when it falls apart, or if one of those things falls out of place, everything falls apart and you have a shit night's sleep as a result. I would advise doing this. We do regular routine breaks. For example, if you're an avid taker of magnesium 2 hours before bed, and let's say you forget to take your magnesium or you take it at the wrong time, or you've gone on holiday and you don't have it with you and you convince yourself that's going to ruin your sleep quality, that's frailty. That is sleep frailty. That's a good term. Let's do a definition here. Sleep frailty. You need to be in a position where you can have a good night's sleep without any of that nonsense. So test yourself, okay? If you track your sleep, and by the way, sleep tracking is pretty bloody inaccurate, okay? Don't get too obsessed with those numbers. It's incredibly inaccurate. Go off of how you feel. Wake up in the morning and see how you feel before you read your readiness score on your watch. The power of placebo is a very strong thing. Even if you slept okay, but your watch seems to think you've slept poorly, and it gives you a low readiness score and a low HRV, for example, you might then convince yourself that you had a bad night's sleep and you might then act on it, right? You might then kind of bitch out of doing harder things. Maybe you don't go to the gym because you think you need to recover. I'd recommend, first and foremost, waking up, getting the day going, and maybe let's say you hit the kind of like midday point or you're in the afternoon and you're thinking, I do actually feel a little bit tired. Maybe check it then and get an idea of things then. So break up sleep frailty by mixing up your routine regularly. So for example, sometimes throughout the week, don't take your magnesium or don't take other things and just don't stress too heavily about it. That's one that I really would advise not getting too obsessed with, because if you are in a position where you don't have your supplements, you might kid yourself out of having a good night's sleep. Caffeine, be consistent with. Alcohol, accept the fact that if you do want to go out and you want to see mates and, socialize, go to party, go to the pub, whatever, understand that your sleep quality will suffer and it is what it is, right? But that's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? Going out and seeing your mates is a good thing. Again, the balancing act. Another thing to consider, and I realize I am massively rambling at this point, when you do have a bad night's sleep, don't go overboard the next day. If you have a bad night's sleep, there are a couple of things that you need to do, but more importantly, things that you don't do. Do not have a lie-in. Don't use more caffeine or have caffeine later in the day to kind of overcompensate, unless you really need to, of course. Don't take a nap, that will shoot yourself in the foot. And don't try and get into bed any earlier than you would do otherwise. Just carry out your next day in the exact same way you would normally. That's the best thing to do. That's another amazing piece of advice when it comes to just having a very easygoing and relatively chill approach to sleep. Let's talk about stress as well, because I think stress is something that's typically quite overlooked. Stress, worrying mind, rumination, all of those things that can make people struggle to fall asleep. Because again, this is drastically overlooked as well. And it's very, very common, especially for people that work hard or live stressy lifestyles. It's very, very easy to slip into this thing where you're stressing and overthinking and all this stuff is preventing you from falling asleep. The way in which I would advise overcoming it is having a very clear cut-off time between your working day and the time in which you should go to bed. So set yourself like a definitive time where you're done with work, and at that end point, write yourself a to-do list for the next coming day. Get everything ready and out of your mind for the next day. And at that point, you can then finish and you are done with your working day. You can then engage in things that are going to help you wind down in the evening and relax. Things that are more escapist or escapism orientated. Things like watching TV, doing some mindfulness, doing some journaling, doing some drawing, some art, doing yoga, going to the gym, watching a series, even watching YouTube. However, I would avoid things that are stressy and are anchored in reality. Things like the news, things like reality TV, maybe even things like thrillers and action-based things or true crime. Maybe it can have a stress response for a lot of people that might be bad for your sleep. Is this too far? This is up to you. Again, I'm not saying that nobody should watch true crime before bed. No way am I saying that. I'm saying figure out what works for you and be aware of the things that might have an impact. And funnily enough, on this stress note as well, the more you think about this obsessive routine of yours and the overwhelming importance of your sleep, the more you will get in your own head about it and the more you're going to struggle to fall asleep as a result. And if that isn't the crux of the sleep paradox, I don't know what is. Now, I almost forgot to record one of the most important points of the video, so let's dive into that bit now. Which is, what should you do if you fall into the sleep paradox in its most literal form, i.e. you can't fall asleep at night? Now, this technique works incredibly well. It's something that I personally do and have done for a very long time now, and it's something that I walk through with my clients and we get amazing success with it. So first up, how long should you give yourself to try and fall asleep? And as you know, the harder you try to fall asleep, the harder it becomes. So I'd advise trying to avoid this thought process of trying to fall asleep. In an ideal world, you're not thinking like that, okay? But each thing as it comes. So how long do you try to fall asleep? I would say about 30 minutes. That's the general recommendation. And if you still can't sleep after 30 minutes, what you don't do is you don't just lie there tossing and turning and trying even harder to fall asleep. Do something that I call the SPB, or sleep paradox breaker. Give yourself about 30 minutes max. If you can't fall asleep, then put your lamp on, get out of bed and do something. I would advise doing things that aren't going to stimulate you. I wouldn't work out. I wouldn't do any work. I would avoid screens if you can. Definitely don't drink any caffeine. Water's obviously fine. Maybe a chamomile tea at this point might be a good idea. This is the perfect opportunity for reading. Now, I recommend reading before bed as it is. So this is a great opportunity to make a slightly bigger dent in whatever book you're reading. And reading does tend to kind of lull you to sleep, so it might work to kind of calm you down again and bring you back into a sleep-ready state. And then when you find yourself feeling tired again, then go back into bed and just do what you'd normally do and just let yourself drift off. I'm going to quote Matt Walker now. Basically, the reason why you get out of bed rather than lying in bed and kind of tossing and turning is that you don't want to associate your bed with wakefulness or lying awake and feeling frustrated. He talks about how the brain is a very associative thing and that you will just start to associate your bed with not sleeping, and it might then compound into a massive issue. So there's your Matt Walker sleep doctor logic behind the SPB, or sleep paradox breaker. Not that it's by any means something I coined or invented, but let's call it that. It's got a nice ring to it. Now, as a kind of concluding point on the sleep paradox, I hope you have an idea of and the fact that there is no right approach for everyone. It's a case of understanding yourself. It's a case of finding out what does definitely work for you, things that you can actually action on a daily basis consistently that isn't going to be too hard for you. So if you can get outside in the morning and view sunlight, then that's fantastic. But don't stress if you are not in a position to be able to do that. It does not mean that you're inevitably going to have shit sleep quality. It just means that it might be a tiny bit better if you do go outside and do that. But we are talking about tiny, tiny increments here. I think it's very easy to fall into this mindset that these things have a massive impact on your sleep. But the reality is it's a combination of all of them. But don't let yourself fall into a position where your sleep has control over you. And this routine that you've built for yourself has control over you. I would say Brian Johnson's too far down the line. I would also say that the Italian man having an espresso at 11 p.m. is too far down the line. But that's my opinion. What's yours? Where do you stand in this? Find out what works for you. Do not think that any one of these things is the be-all, end-all, one-size-fits-all thing that is going to fix everything to do with your sleep. It doesn't work like that. These things work together. No one is better than the other. And most importantly, do not overlook the basics. Sleep requires you to relax. If you don't let yourself relax because you're stressing over all these other components, it's only going to get harder. So have you had any experience with the sleep paradox? Let me know in the comments. I'll be really interested to hear if you have experienced this in any way. I know that loads of my followers have. I certainly have. A ton of my clients have. I hope the information in this video is useful for you. Let me know about your experience in the comments and stay tuned for next week's video.